Hey guys, welcome back for part 8 of Black Cake, a novel by Charmaine Wilkerson. We will be having 3 readings this week. I know, exciting, right? Three readings this week. And I'm excited as we begin. So go ahead and hit the like button and let's get started. Byron. Byron's friend Cable was nicknamed Cable because when he and Byron were kids, he used to love the Pay TV station with all the old classic films from when their parents were children. He knew all the ones where the black folks had good roles, though he loved all the classics, really, as long as the black maids or porters weren't portrayed in that bug-eyed fashion that could get a person riled up. And even then, he might still watch. You guys, this has nothing to do with what is being said, but I am one of those people who really struggles to watch certain movies that involve injustices. So there are times where I've really wanted to watch certain things. Like I've never watched Roots. I read the book and the book alone did too much for me, so I've never watched it. So there are certain things that I don't want to see. So I'm reading this and that's what I'm thinking about. Okay, anyways. So he and Byron had gotten into their worst argument over that. Cable loved the old movies because they tended to have a clear attitude about life. The good guys made out good in the end, or else they died heroes. Cable believed in the goodness of people, believed in making sacrifices for others, believed in redemption. He believed that things could work out decently, even in the worst of times. Cable was the kind of friend that every man needed in his life. Cable called about meeting up for beer, but Byron begged off, told him his mother was in the hospital. A surfing accident? Mrs. Bennet? And you didn't tell me? Sorry, man, it just happened yesterday morning, Byron said. Banged up her forehead, smashed up her leg pretty bad. They had to operate, but she'll be okay. Wow. So when she tried to end it all and she was rescued, that's the injuries that resulted from that. Cable was at the hospital 20 minutes later. Surfing, huh? He said, sipping from a cup of cafeteria coffee. Where did this happen? Balboa, Byron said. Newport Beach? Byron nodded. The wedge? Byron nodded again. They sat for a while silently, while Byron listened to the click of Cable's brain. Byron knew what Cable was thinking. Byron was thinking it too. He had managed to surf the wedge, but his mother had only watched from the shore and cheered him on. It was a haven for boarders and body surfers, but with the biggest swells in Southern California, it could also be a dangerous place too. What was she doing over there? Cable asked. Byron turned his head slowly from side to side. You sure your mom hasn't got some type of death wish, Byron? Mom did after Dad died. Your mother, but she seems fine. She's better now, but you need to keep an eye on that old girl, Byron. Your mom is a good surfer, good enough to know that she's not that good. Your mom's a good surfer and she knows she's not good. I'm just oh goodness. Byron took off his glasses and stared hard at his childhood friend. I hear you, Cable, but it's been 5 years since my dad died. I think my mother's been a little bored, I'll give you that. So she thought she'd give it a try and she made a bad call. It's amazing how sometimes in our gut we know the truth about things and yet we still try to, excuse it or try to push it down because the reality of the other thing, which is that his mom tried to unalive herself, is just too much probably for him to think of. Cable said nothing, raised his eyebrows, took another sip of coffee. Byron looked away and sighed. Shit, he said. Either way, we need to do something. We need to find her a man, Byron. I mean, no disrespect to Mr. Bennet. You know I love that man like an uncle, but no, this is not good. We need to find her a man, someone who can keep up with her. He's got to be at least 15 years younger, at least. Byron shook his head and laughed. 15 years younger means that his mother was really like active, if that's what he's saying. Why are you laughing? Don't laugh. Everyone needed a friend like Cable. He could make Byron laugh in the worst of times, but later Byron lay awake in the middle of the night thinking about what Cable had said about his mother. Death wish. There was a feeling up under his rib cage, a kind of panic. He picked up his cell phone to call Benny, then put the phone back on the nightstand. He thought Benny should know, Benny should be here. Their mother needed to have her children with her, but his ma had to be the one to make that call. Either that or Benny needed to get off her selfish rear and get in touch of her own volition. Otherwise, they would just have to go on the way they had since before his dad died. It bothers me that they allowed so much time to go on without talking to each other over something that just could have easily been talked through. Without Benny, with his sister's absence seeping into the cracks in their lives, much later, Byron would see that his mother's surfing incident was a turning point in their lives. After his mom left the hospital, Byron canceled a couple of work trips and went back to sleeping in his childhood home. His mother, still unable to drive or volunteer at the community garden, rented a wheelchair for a couple of weeks and planned some play dates, as she liked to call them. Byron drove her to one of the old film studios, to a museum, to a concert. Then he took her to see that famous black swimmer at the convention center. By then, she was fairly agile on the crutches and seemed happier than she'd been in months. It was during that period that Byron first saw Mr. Mitch, the lawyer, who apparently knew much more about Byron and Benny than they did about themselves. He should have guessed that his mother was up to something and that Mr. Mitch, like the others before him, had already fallen under his mother's spell. Interesting way to put it, under his mother's spell. Guess we'll see more about that later. The usual. The weather folks said 2017 was turning out to be one of the hottest on record for California, and it didn't surprise Byron one bit. The whole year had been a bit off. As far as he was concerned, he didn't know yet that the coming year would be his mother's last. Wow. He only knew he was ready for it to end. All these brush fires, his mother's accident, being turned down for that promotion, all the things that were not going well with Lynette. They were constantly arguing, and half the time he couldn't figure out about what exactly. Ma? He called, stamping his feet on the rug in the entryway. His boots released the chalky dust mix with ash that had floated down from the brush fires up north. "Hello, son," came his mother's voice from down the hallway. "How was your day?" His mother's mood seemed to be improving as all her injuries healed. "The usual," Byron said. The worst of the California brush fires had claimed lives and burned homes. All of them had stripped the hillsides of plant life, which would leave them more vulnerable to mudslides when it rained, which would further erode the soil, pollute water sources, slow seeding growth, and once again destabilize hillsides. I never thought about that aspect of it. I love the fact that they're mentioning this because it's making me think about some things here when it comes to nature. Each year, Byron was called on by local journalists to comment on the storm water flows into the ocean and polluted runoff, even though his work actually focused on other areas of research. Byron was popular with the schools. It helped that he had a gargantuan social media following and was a brainy athlete. This last characteristic was specifically appealing to educators who invited Byron to their public schools to drive home the message that athletics and scholastic excellence could go together and that one should not be an excuse to eschew the other. I agree. Byron was happy to be served up as a role model for students, especially those whose demographics continue to be underrepresented in science and tech careers. But in wanting students to break free of thinking that might keep them from going into certain careers, the schools were often guilty of reinforcing rather than shattering stereotypes. The whole sports thing was an example. Everyone wanted Byron to highlight his track and field wins in college. Everyone asked him if he had ever played basketball. These were the sports he was expected to mention when talking with inner city kids. No one had ever asked Byron about the sport that most clearly defined him as a California man, his surfing. You would think that they would ask about that, especially if he's that good, but it just goes to show you how some people think. His mother had been the one to teach Byron how to surf. They had always gotten stares, the little black kid and his towering mother, leaning into the surfboards in an area where many Angloans believed the sport had been invented by blonde men. Sometimes she would bring him to the sand and head out on her own with the board, drawing shouts of approval as she staggered back ashore. Some people think surfing is a relationship with the sea, his mother said one day when Byron was struggling in the water. But surfing is really a relationship between you and yourself. The sea is going to do whatever it wants, she winked. What you need to do, Byron, is know who you are and where you are at all times. Oh, know who you are and where you are. And now he's finding out a lot about himself that he didn't know based on his mother. This is going to be interesting. This is about you finding and keeping your center. This is how you take on a wave. Then you might find that you need to practice more, or there's a storm swell coming in, or the wave is simply just too much for you. You might even decide that you're just not cut out for the surfing, and that's all right too. But you cannot know which of these is true unless you go out there with your head in the right place. This was true of surfing, and it was true of life, his mom said. Earlier today, as Byron got himself organized to visit 2 middle schools, he did something a little different. He placed his backpack and laptop on the passenger seat of his Jeep, then turned back to grab one of his surfboards. Why hadn't he done this sooner? He thought as he loaded the board into the back of the vehicle. Oh, I love this. How many of you have one of these? Byron said, holding the longboard upright as he faced an assembly of students from several classrooms. Only 2 hands went up, but Byron caught the wave, climbing through the connections between surfing and physics and his professional studies of the seafloor. The idea to talk about surfing had come to Byron the evening before as he sat in his car waiting for a highway cop to run a check on his driver's license. It was the 4th time this year that he had been pulled over by police, and to keep his nerves under control, Byron had breathed deeply and slowly and imagined himself running toward the water with the board under his arms. At this point, the way life is set up, I feel like all of us have to do different things in order to cope with being pulled over. And I know about, what's associated with various demographics, but I'm talking about as a whole because everything nowadays is just so jacked up. That was when he decided to make a little change to his usual career day presentation. Like most of you, I was born right here in Southern California, Byron said as he faced 1,000 students sitting on bleachers in the gym. And I went to grade school, high school, and both of my universities in this state, also near the coast. He held the surfboard in place with one hand and tapped it 3 times with the other. As you know, California is famous for its surfing. And I like to surf, but in all my years growing up in Orange County, I rarely saw another black guy on a surfboard. Now, why do you think that is? One kid put up his hand. Tradition, he said. Tradition, Byron said. I can see why you might think that, but whose tradition are we talking about? He leans the board against the lectern and walks back to the kids. Black people surf in the Caribbean, where my parents were born. In fact, it was my mother who taught me how to surf. And folk surf in African countries where more than 1 billion people live and where, as you know, most people happen to be black or brown skinned. And what about Asia? Long surfing history there. So why not here in the surfing capital of the world? What a great point. What a great point. Here's the thing. There's all types of stereotypes out there or thoughts. It's just like they a lot of times people act so surprised that I know how to swim. That was a given. Everyone in my family knows how to swim. It was something that was required, and I've passed it on to my child. I taught him how to float, and the YMCA taught him how to swim. It's just something that's done. So hearing this, it's like, yeah, why is it something that isn't done? Why don't we do this? Why don't we continue this tradition? Because it is a tradition for a lot of families. Oh, okay, back to the book. Some of the kids were leaning forward now. Now, don't get me wrong, Byron said. There's actually a whole group of Black surfers farther up the coast. They even give lessons on weekends. But when I was growing up in my area, it just wasn't a thing. There are various reasons why surfing tended to be limited to only certain groups of people in California. Byron loves this. A whole room full of adolescents listening. But I'm not going to get into all of that here. That's a whole nother story. What I want to say is this. The same thing is true for the work that I do. When I was still studying at university, I was the only Black guy in my doctorate program. Byron raised his hands. Now I know you think we're talking like a Neolithic age, laughter, but it wasn't all that long ago. Basically, because kids feel like anything is old after a certain age. So he's letting them know, no, I'm not that old. I'm not as old as you may think. It wasn't that long ago. I like that. I'm happy to say that I finished my studies and I do useful work. And I love my job. And now I see university students of different stripes getting into my line of research. Times have changed, it's true, but the numbers of students going for the sciences and following that all the way through to the doctoral level or to jobs that offer real opportunities for promotion have not been keeping up as they should. So what's my point? Hands up waving. Good. I want to hear your questions in just a minute. But let me just conclude by saying this. If you want to surf, don't wait to find someone out there who looks just like you before you go surfing. I love this. And if you're interested in my field, ocean sciences, remote sensing, or something like chemistry or biology or information technology, don't wait for someone to give you permission. Just go ahead and study and apply for programs everywhere you can, because we need more talented young people of all kinds, and you can't win if you don't play. Byron looked back at the kid who said tradition. So tradition, yeah, tradition, has sometimes told us that only certain kinds of people should study certain subjects or engage in certain sports or play in certain orchestras or what have you. But tradition is only about what people have or have not done. It's not about what they are capable of doing, and it's not about what they will be doing in the future. A standalone blackboard had been set up in the gym. Byron walked over to it, picked up a piece of chalk, and started writing. I'm honored that the principal has invited me here to speak to you all today as a kind of role model. But let me repeat myself. If you do not see someone out there who looks like you need to go for it anyway. He turned to face the students again. Are you going to let someone else's view of who you are and what you should do hold you back? He smiled, thinking of what his mother used to say to him when he was still in school. Now, I'm going to get all Pollyanna on you here and say that there aren't genuine obstacles to confront, including financial barriers and stereotyping. Those of us who are a generation ahead of you are supposed to be working on these things, and a lot of us are trying. But do yourself a favor and think about it first before you don't think about it, okay? Applause. Byron stepped aside to call attention to what he had been writing on the chalkboard. Ride that wave. This is what I would like to be able to say to you folks, that in life, you should just catch the wave and ride it. But what if you don't see any good waves coming your way? You need to go looking. Don't stop looking, all right? And one of the ways to do that looking is to keep studying. Do not underestimate the value of applying yourself in school, because you cannot win, Byron said, cupping both ears with his hands. If you don't play, the audience responded. At the end of the Q&A session, some of the kids came up to him to ask about science programs and internships and the like. but he could see that a couple of them were just angling to get a closer look at the surfboard. That was all right, Byron thought as he posed for selfies with students. It was a start, but he knew that even if all of these kids were to take his advice, it wouldn't be enough. That's why he was going to start his own scholarship program someday. I love that. So you had a good day, son? His mother was asking him now. Yeah, Ma, the usual. How's your leg? Doing better, Byron. Better every day. His mother was still using a cane after her surfing accident. She should have known better than to take on that wave. All of her talk about knowing who you were and where you were all the time hadn't kept his mother from acting like a daredevil and nearly breaking her neck in the process. Unless, as Cable suggested, his ma had known exactly what she was doing. More than anyone, even more than his father, Byron's mother had taught him the value of strategic thinking or calculated action. He used to think that he was most like his mom, but lately his mother had revealed herself to have a kind of reckless streak that eluded his own logic and left him feeling nervous. Kind of like Benny. Yeah, kind of like Benny. My name is Benny. The year before her mother died, Benedetta Bennett found herself standing at a lectern in a midtown Manhattan meeting hall saying, "Hello, my name is Benny." As soon as the words came out, she knew that she had made a colossal mistake. Benny stood there trembling, the electronic fizz of the microphone teasing the pause. A dampness spread across the small of her back. Her waistband itched. She looked up again at her audience, cringing at their open faces. 30 pairs of eyes. In those soft, warm seconds of brotherly love, they had no idea, did they? Those eyes would soon will her out of the room as she hurried down the aisle towards the door. I don't understand what she did wrong. They couldn't know what a state she was in. They couldn't know that half an hour earlier she had nearly dropped to the icy sidewalk next to the doggy base of the tree, overwhelmed by despair. Benny had gotten off the bus from one of her jobs and had been walking, unable to shake off the feeling inside. She felt her knees willing her to the ground. Just then, a man walked by, and she caught the look in his eyes as he headed up a set of stairs to the entrance of the building. His 40-something face, though framed in a movie star haircut and buffered about the chin by a cashmere scarf, seemed to mirror Benny's own bruised interior, only with something else, a look that bordered on relief. The man pulled open a huge door, paused, and looked back at Benny. The door was forest green, and the forest green was Benny's favorite color. I'm not following you because you got a green door. Just saying. Sorry. So she followed the man inside. No, I'm not doing that. Benny passed through a dimly lit foyer, smelling of dusty paper and school days, and entered a large, warm room with rows of folded up chairs and table covered with snacks and flyers. She nodded her thanks when someone handed her a paper cup of coffee and gluten-free cookie. She basked in the murmured welcomes, the sanctuary of unknown faces, the heat of the cup on her fingers. She was already feeling better. She could have stopped herself right there, but she didn't. Instead, she took a seat between a young man in a Philly blue sweater and a woman in a scarlet skirt and allowed the tide of goodwill and the need for cathartics to pull her up to the head of the room. Catharsis. Okay, to pull her up to the head of the room. Until then, no one had wanted to know who she was, where she had come from, or why she was there, because after all, everyone was there for the same basic reason and the why exactly of their presence on that particular evening, and the who exactly they had been or hoped to be would not require elaboration unless and until they took to the floor. And now she was holding on to the edge of the lectern with one hand and clasping a half-eaten cookie with the other. My name is Benny, and I'm an alcoholic. Really? I wasn't expecting that. Okay. With those few words, Benny had officially crashed a meeting for recovering alcoholics for want of a place where people would say, come in no matter what, where they would support her even when she told them that she hadn't attended her own father's funeral service, where they would listen without a trace of shock in their faces when she told them why, where she could say to people who might not understand but who would listen to her anyway that she was tired of having her authenticity as a person called into question simply because she did not fit the roles that others wanted her to play, or because she wanted to play roles that others seemed to feel were beyond her. Benny knew that she should run out of the room without saying another word, but the cookie was homemade and she could taste a hint of ginger. And for the first time in a long time, someone was listening. So she spoke. She told them everything. Once she had finished talking about her father's rejection, about her mother's disappointment, about her brother who wouldn't talk to her, about the lover who had hurt her, she came right out and admitted that she attended the meeting under false pretenses. So she's not an alcoholic. Okay. She had attended the meeting under false pretenses because she hadn't known what else to do. That type of desperation is real. I hate that wow, okay. She hadn't meant any disrespect, she said. She was going to be leaving right then. She stepped away from the microphone and headed straight for the exit, shaking her head and muttering, I'm so sorry. As she rushed past the chairs, a woman raised her voice and said, there are support groups for that sort of thing, you know. And a second person said, at least you were honest. While Mr. Movie Hair, who had unwittingly led Benny there to begin with, said, good luck to you. Benny's face was burning, but she had the feeling that somehow her first and only AA meeting had been some help to her after all. Benny walked down the steps of the building and kept going for 40 minutes until she reached her apartment. She sank into the couch and pulled a blanket around her, grateful for the warmth and the smell of last night's garlic still clinging to its fibers. Enough. 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 Benny turned on her cell phone and called home, but there was no answer. Later, she would do the math, and she would figure out that her mother had been to the hospital after her surfing accident, and that Byron hadn't bothered to call Benny to let her know. This was the kind of thing that could happen when you stayed away for so long. Ooh, boy. Y'all, it's so much going on in this book, and I love all the little different stories and points of view. Okay, cake. Benny lay awake for hours, thinking of what she might have said had her mother picked up the phone. At 4 a.m, she got out of bed and wiped down the kitchen counter. She emptied the oven of the pots and pans she kept stored there, took some eggs out of the refrigerator, and reached into a lower cupboard for the most important ingredient, the jar of dry fruits that had been soaking in rum and port. She poured the mixture into a bowl and added dates and cherries. No citron, though. She had never liked citron, nor had her mother. Benny had just enough time to go through the whole routine and set 2 black cakes on top of the stove to cool before getting ready for her morning job. She still felt the need to talk to her mom, but she didn't have the courage to try calling her again. This would have to be her message, the cakes. She had taken some photos of the preparation. She would send them to her mother along with a letter. Benny would let her mother see what she had learned from her, how closely she had been paying attention, how well she had improved her technique. Because baking a black cake was like handling a relationship. The recipe on paper was simple enough. That's true, because let me tell y'all something. I have tried to bake black cake before, and I'm a good cook, great cook. Baker, not so much. When it comes to baking, I normally ask my son for his help. But I've tried to make black cake before with the instructions that have been left by my grandmother, and it's not the same at all. But I think that's with a lot of food, really, especially baking stuff, desserts. Paper was simple enough. Its success depended on the quality of ingredients, but mostly on how well you handled them, on the timing of the various processes, on how you responded to the variables like humidity in the air or the functioning of the oven thermostat. Benny hadn't been very good at relationships, but she knew how to make cake work. Photo number 1, the jar of fruit sitting next to a group of eggs. One day, Benny would develop an eggless version of this recipe because times have changed and food was going to have to change with them. My mom has an eggless version. My mother's a vegan, so yeah. But that would take some experimentation and probably leave her mother appalled. Snap. Photo number 2, the blackening of the sugar. Smoke rising gently out of the pot. The fire turned off just in time, the wooden spoon sticking out of the saucepan. Snap. Photo number 3, 2 cake tins filled with batter, each tin sitting in a pan of water in the oven. Snap. This is the only thing that I had left when I lost my family. Benny's mother once told her, tapping a finger on the side of her head, I carried it all in here. The black cake recipe, my schooling, my pride. Photo number 4, a close-up of one black cake cooling on the counter. The color of the moist earth, the smell of heaven. Snap. Preparing the icing would take another full day's work, after which Benny would take a photo of her signature decoration. The one large hibiscus flower, orangey red, and couched in deep green leaves on a simple white base. She was willing to bet her ma had never seen anything like that. She'd be proud of Benny. On those rare occasions when her mother telephoned Benny, there was usually a specific reason, like a birthday. But one day, Ma simply called and talked into Benny's voicemail. Remember our baking, her mother said. Used to drive your father and Byron mad whenever we blocked off the kitchen. Benny could hear her ma smiling. Then her mother fell silent for a moment before saying that Byron was doing well, often traveling, always on TV. Her mother left these messages on Benny's mobile phone in the middle of the night, East Coast time, when she must have known that Benny would have turned the phone off. It was as if her mother had wanted to reach out, only not all the way. Y'all, pride, man, ruins things. Her ma always called from home. Benny assumed her mother had some kind of cell phone by now, but Benny had no idea what the number was. In her most recent message, her ma said, I've been doing some reading and thinking about people like you. People like you. People with complicated relationships. Benny's mother still couldn't bring herself to name Benny's differences, but she was trying. I just hate the fact that because someone loves someone who's the same sex as them, that they get looked down upon. I just hate it. And I hate that people think, because I don't think, I have friends that I've had a lot of long talks with, and I don't think that it's something that they choose. Well, let me not say that. There are some people who are just doing it just to do it. And there are other people who I feel like this is something that they really like have tried to work past and work through and not be, but it's caused them more harm than good. And I'd rather you be alive and be happy by pursuing whatever love interest you want to than for you to be depressed and sad and want to hurt yourself or be in a situation where you're all alone because you're trying to make everybody else happy. But back to the book. She suspected that her mom would have come around long before if it hadn't been her father's resistance. Her mom had always done things her way, except when it came to Benny's dad. And this was something that Ma passed down to Byron, that unquestioning loyalty to Bert Bennett. Benny had loved her father and admired him, and she too had been loyal to him until the day that he stopped being loyal to her. He was the one who had drawn the line in the sand, wasn't he? Ma was right about one thing. It was true that Benny's relationship had been complicated. People had a tendency to relate to only one thing or another, and not to people like her, not to in-betweeners, not to neither nors. This had been true in politics. It had been true in religion. It had been true in culture. And it sure as hell was true when it came to the laws of attraction. Benny had to watch herself. She was overmixing the batter. She was getting agitated. She was thinking of how she had been called a flake, called confused, called insincere. And trying to live with an open heart, Benny had set herself up to be perpetually mistrusted. Thank goodness times have changed since her difficult college days, but there was still a lot of misunderstanding to go around. And when people didn't understand something, they often felt threatened. If that's not the true state, if you don't understand something, sometimes people feel threatened. I agree with that. Felt that. Ooh, and when people felt threatened, they often turned to violence. Now that part, I don't. Benny writes, the cake baking photos were ready and tucked into a padded envelope. Benny pulled a stool over to the kitchen counter and picked up a pen. Dear Ma, Benny began. Benny's first mistake was to write the note by hand. She'd always been a slow writer. Her second mistake was to think that she could explain herself in a handwritten note, not only because there was so much to say, but because some things were too ugly to write down. Still, she wanted to try, even though 5 years had gone by since her father's death. I know it's been a long time since we've talked. I heard your messages. I just want you to know that I appreciated them, and I think about you all the time. I'm really sorry about Dad's funeral. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Actually, I was there that day. I just didn't let you know it. I saw you in that peach-colored dress that Dad always loved, and I am so glad you wore that instead of the conventional black. I could just imagine a couple of those ladies, you know who I mean, seeing the widow of the esteemed Bert Bennett wearing such a bright dress at her husband's funeral. Daddy would have found that funny. There's a reason why I didn't go up to you and Byron. I know this is a long time coming, but I want to explain. Benny wrote about Steve, about college, about the things she'd been trying to accomplish, about her disappointments. She was sorry. She said that so much time had gone by, but she would not apologize for being who she was, even if being who she was hadn't brought her a whole lot of comfort of late. Betty finished the letter and sealed it, but it would be a while before she could bring herself to slip it into a mailbox. By the time she did, it was already autumn 2018, and Benny sees now that her mother had ran out of time. Oh, wow. Now, Mrs. Bennett. BNB. I know your father could be strict with you children. He had such high expectations for you two. We both did. And I see now that this put a lot of pressure on you. But your father was my love, and he gave me a beautiful boy and a girl, and he loved you two more than you will ever know. Maybe one day you'll have children of your own, and then you'll see. Benedetta, I'm thinking of you right now. Surely you must know that your father cared for you deeply. You were his baby girl, but you had grown up to become such a different kind of woman from what we had expected. This doesn't mean that we didn't love you, and it doesn't mean that we didn't believe in you. But yes, we had our own views, and we expected you to hear us out. We were worried about how you were going to make your way in this world. I realized that times have changed. It used to be that a solid education could make a difference in this country, especially for people like us with all the prejudices that could get in the way. No one seems to know anymore what it takes for a young person to make a career or to have a stable home life. You young people have so much more freedom now, even in terms of who to love. But it also seems as though you have less guidance, despite all those how-to lists on the internet. It is as if there are so many choices that is no longer possible to know which path is right for you. And the prejudices are still there, less formal in some cases, but still present. In any case, we felt that a college degree couldn't hurt, not to mention one from a prestigious university. When you dropped out of college and refused to go back, it just felt like the beginning of an unraveling of something that we had worked so hard to create for you, a kind of safety net that we thought you could carry with you for the rest of your life. And I hate to admit it, but we were a little offended too, after everything we had done for you. I don't think you realize, Benny, how lucky you were to do so well in school. How could you? Except for that one dip in your grades in high school, all you had to do was show up and you were at the top of your class. It became evident that you had some kind of gift, Benny, and we felt like you were throwing it away. About that Thanksgiving Day. Okay, before I go there, it's sad that she couldn't tell her parents what was going on at college because it was more than her just not wanting college. She had been attacked and her parents didn't even know it. So it just goes to show you how disconnected they were at various points. Let me continue. About that Thanksgiving Day, I know your father and I had always taught you that love and loyalty counted for more than anything else. But what happens when love and loyalty are in conflict with each other? I love you children more than anything, but my loyalty to your father was the bedrock of our family. I needed to be there for your dad, just as he has always been there for me, for us. Without him, none of us would have made it this far. Your dad needed a little time to get his head around what you were trying to tell us about your social life. But then you walked out and his pride got in the way. Yours too, I suspect. I didn't think we'd end up going 8 years without seeing each other. First, you ran off and never called again. Then your father became sick, and I figured I'd let you know once he was better, tell you to come back home to see us, but before we knew it, he was gone. And then we didn't see you at the funeral, and that was just too much, even for me. It is true. I didn't feel like talking to you after that. I thought I needed to keep my distance to stay healthy in the head. What a fool I was, Benny. Once again, I had wasted time that was never mine to squander. Once in a while, I leave a voice message on your cell phone, but you never responded. But now I have your letter, the one with the photos of the cake, the photos you said you meant to mail me months before. I called you when I saw them. I left you a message. I love those pictures. And now I know about your reasons for leaving college, about Steve. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Why didn't you ask for help? Why do we women let shame get in the way of our well-being? I thought that times had changed since I was a girl, but apparently not enough. I didn't even think of that. I didn't think of that because her mother held her own secrets, some of which were for shame, like the fact that she has another child out there that's been taken. And here her daughter wasn't attacked in that way, but had similar things going on that she was holding back too because of shame. Oh, I love this. All right, y'all. This is going to be it. Betrayed. Betrayed. That's how Byron feels hearing his mother's words. He doesn't even know what she's talking about. He doesn't understand what's happened with Benny. And who is this Steve person anyway? Oh, yeah. All Byron knows is he's been left out. He who did everything for his mother while Benny was off who knows where. Oh, Lord, here we go with Byron. Byron, get it together. How many times had Byron wanted to see Benny, but had stopped short of calling her out of loyalty to his mom? How many times had he cursed his sister for not bridging the gap, for not reaching out? How many times had he asked around trying to keep track of his sister without calling her directly? Oh, wow. Now he finds out that his mother and sister were in contact and neither of them even bothered to tell him. For a while, Byron had been so angry with Benny after her no-show at their father's funeral that he hadn't even wanted to talk to her. It had been the latest in a series of steps that had served only to agitate their mother. Dropping out of college, moving from one city to another, cooking in Italy, art in Arizona, sharing less and less with them about her life. It seemed to Byron that his once open-hearted baby sister had morphed into a self-absorbed bitch. Oh, wow. Don't use that kind of language about a woman, his mother would have said. But that was exactly what was going through Byron's mind. And wasn't it true? After his mother nearly broke her neck surfing last year, Byron had wanted to pick up the phone and call Benny and say, Benedetta, please come home. Because the idea that this stubborn, eccentric mother might want to do anything but live her life, even after their father's death, had shaken Byron's sense of security. But then he got to thinking, why should he have to call his sister? When was the last time she had called Byron? Oh, goodness. I hate that they're all doing the same exact things. Although Byron had lived much of his adult life fully aware of the tenuousness, I'm saying this wrong, tenuousness, tenuousness, of his existence as an African American man, the vulnerability of his job, his popularity, his physical safety, always his physical safety, he had felt himself to be on solid ground once he stepped into his childhood home. The virtual disappearance of his sister and then the loss of his father had caused the foundation of his life to tremble, but it was his mother's so-called accident and the state of mind that it seemed to imply that had threatened to fully dislodge the cornerstone. Byron also came close to calling Benny the last time he was pulled over by a cop. He was overcome afterward by the need to talk to her, to hear her voice, to hear her say his name, to tell Benny what had happened, to know that Benny at least was safe, even if Byron might not ever be. He could not talk to his mother about such things. You could not talk to your parents about their worst nightmare. He picked up his cell phone and scrolled down to Benny's name, but just sat there in his car, looking at the screen as his hands still shaking. Y'all keep pulling this man over because of a Jeep? I'm confused. I know that there are cars that get pulled over, but a Jeep? At least Byron knows now that his mother didn't go to her deathbed without hearing from Benny. That's true. That's true. She didn't, which was something that I was thinking had happened, but at least she got that part. That's a good thing, right? Still, he feels betrayed. He knows that he and Benny are going to need to have a real talk soon. He just doesn't know how to begin that kind of conversation. Oh, wait, Byron says. What was that? He asks Mr. Mitch to stop the recording. He realizes he just missed a part of what his mother was saying. Mr. Mitch presses pause and reaches for a tissue box on the coffee table. Byron sees that Mr. Mitch's nose is bright red. What is with this guy? He's not crying, is he? Sorry, the allergies are killing me, Mr. Mitch says. Right, Byron thinks. Allergies at this time of year? Would you like a cup of tea or something, Mr. Mitch? Benny asks. No, I'm fine, thanks, but please just call me Mitch, no Mr. or Charles. That's what your mother called me, Charles. And the way he says your mother sets off a ding in Byron's head. Of course. Why didn't he pick up on that? There was something going on between Charles Mitch and Ma, wasn't there? Charles Mitch is in mourning too. Okay, Benny says. She's hugging the cushion again, the way she used to when she was a little girl. Just like that, over her middle. Maybe not the same cushion, a different color. His mother would have given the old one to shelters years ago. She was always taking little pieces of their lives and giving them to families who had less. Their old toys, their old books, their old blankets. These things aren't you, she said. These things are just things. Right. Unless you were talking about that awful sofa of hers. How many times had Byron tried to convince her to part ways with it? Who invented crushed velvet anyways? I'm laughing because both of my grandmas had crushed velvet sofas, and one of them went as far as to putting plastic over that crushed velvet. And she did not take that plastic off of that crushed velvet sofa until I was in my 20s. Oh boy, Byron misses his baby sister, but this person sitting across from him, this is not really his Benny. This is a woman who has lived her life without him for the past 8 years and keeps looking at him like she expects him to forget all of that. It's like she's here now, so nothing else matters. Well, what about the hurt? Hurt matters. Tomorrow, they'll have a service for their mother, and then what? Will it all be over? Will he and Benny just go their separate ways? Will there be nothing left of the life he used to know? And that is it for this chapter. Well, this part of reading. You all, I am really, really enjoying this book. It is so good to me. And we got a lot more to go, which is something that I love because the characters are developing. We're learning more and more. We're seeing more and more. Let me know down below what you thought about this part. I hope you guys are enjoying your Monday off because that is when you'll see this. Until next time.